Hello. Thank you for joining us today. I'm just seeing people start to filter in, so welcome to this webinar on Indigenous youth in the media. My name is Lee. I'm the Associate Program Manager for the Indigenous Reporters Program, and we wanted, and we've been planning this for a little while now, and we wanted to respond to some calls that we've been seeing um, to report on Indigenous youth in a more holistic way, not only as a response to traumatic or tragic events, but instead to really represent Indigenous youth as whole people with the really wide and exciting range of things that they are doing, and the strength and the creativity that Indigenous youth show every day. And so that's where we were coming from in wanting to hold this webinar today. We have three fabulous panelists in Brandi Morin, Kelsie Kilawna, and Yesno, and I will let them introduce themselves soon. But I know they all have a lot of insight to bring to this question, and of course our fabulous moderator Ryan McMahon. And Ryan will be opening our event today with a prayer and an acknowledgement of the graves discovered recently or uncovered recently in Cowessess and Kamloops and other locations. And so I will turn, and obviously on the screen for anyone who needs it, for any survivors who might be joining us today, is the crisis line for residential school survivors. So obviously, please, I know it's a difficult day and it's a difficult topic, so please do use those services if they would benefit you, if you need them. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Ryan. Thanks, Ryan, and thank you to all our panelists for being with us today. We, as we're just waiting for this to get going. Okay, here's Ryan. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Lee, for coordinating this, and to our helpers behind the scenes that are moderating and helping behind the scenes. We appreciate you all for holding this space and having this space for us to have this conversation. As Lee said, the idea for this conversation came through feedback and sort of general want and need for JHR to help facilitate a conversation around young people, young Indigenous people in media, to contextualize not just their work but their lives. That ironically, given the news today, that what we're trying to push back against is the way that young people often show up in Canadian media, which is through a traumatic lens. And obviously, given the morning that we've had here in Canada with news out of Cowessess in Saskatchewan, trauma has been around Indigenous youth in this place they now call Canada for the last few hundred years. And I often talk about the miracle that we're still here, and we're reminded by the events of this morning that it is an actual miracle that young Indigenous people in their home communities, inside of their families, inside of their nations, are thriving. And there are certainly challenges, and we'll talk about some of those challenges today. But we meant to put this together as a way to shine a light on some of the positive contributions that and dynamic contributions that Indigenous youth are making to this country. So that's why we're here. And the backdrop of it again, is the news that we learned this morning, and the news that we'll continue to learn over the coming weeks and months as more truth is revealed to this country. Um, I've accepted uh, the request from Lee to start us off in prayer, and I'm going to sing an honor song to get us started this morning or this afternoon. And for this, I just ask you keep survivors in your mind and your heart, hold place for the ones you love, and send out your good heart, your good mind to all those young ones that didn't make it home. Yeah, 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 do, yeah, 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 we ha, hi, ha, hey, ho, ho, yeah, hey, ha, hi, we, hey, oh, oh. Yeah, 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 hey, ha, hey, ha, hey, ho, ho. Yeah, hey, ha, hey, we, hey, oh, oh. Yeah, yeah, oh, we, yeah, yeah, ha, hey, we, ha, hey, ho, yeah, hey, ha, hey, we, hey, oh, oh. Yeah, we, ha, hey, ha, hey, ho, yeah, ha, hey, we, hey, oh, oh. Yeah, we, oh, we, yeah, yeah, ha, hey, we, ha, we, ho, yeah, hey, ha, hey, we, hey, oh, oh. Yeah, we, ha, hey, we, ha, we, ho, yeah, we, ha, hey, we, hey, oh, oh. Yeah, we, oh, we, yeah, yeah, we, ha, hey, we, ha, we, ho, yeah, we, ha, hey, we, hey, oh, oh. Yeah, we, ho. Yeah, we, oh. Ha miigwech nindenwe maganaduk miigwech bizindaik. Thank you, thank you all for listening. And with that, we'll open up our panel. Invite everybody to join us on screen, and we'll do our introductions and talk about why we're here today. Um, that song was actually comes from Treaty 4 territory. It's a memorial song. It's given to me by Donnie Spidell, who's a respected knowledge keeper in and around Treaty 4, Treaty 6 territory. He's an Ayapahe ceremonial keeper, and he gave me that song to share. So miigwech to Donnie and Treaty 4 for holding that bundle. At this
Ryan,
time, yes.
I can't get in. It says the host has stopped my video, so
Okay. Well, we'll have Yash. We'll have Yash bring you
okay,
in.
here we go. Thank you.
I'm sitting on the floor and my
We're
foot
good.
just fell asleep. So let's. I'm grateful for the delay. My left butt cheek is asleep too. It's gonna be a rough hour. Oh, when I was singing, I didn't know my foot was tingling, but now I can't feel my leg. That's all right. Um, Nice to see you all here. Thank you. We have a powerhouse panel of journalists that are out there, not just creating change, but flipping the narrative up on its head, and I think really making waves in a way that is impactful and brand new. So I'm going to try to talk less and turn the floor over now to our panel for introductions. And I'll turn it over to Brandi. I'll just go around the horn here. I have Brandi, Kelsie, and then Riley, and then we'll jump right in. So, Brandi, please let us know who you are, where you're from.
Tanse, I'm Brandi Morin. I am a member of the Michelle First Nation. I'm based in Treaty 6 west of Edmonton. And I have been specializing in telling Indigenous stories for 8 years. I do national and international work now, and I've been a journalist in general for over 10 years.
Thanks for being here, Brandi.
White Haskoha is Grease Kelsie. I am a member of the Okanagan Indian Band in so-called Vernon, BC. I'm a Silk and Shakwatmik storyteller, and I'm actually only 1 year deep into journalism. I spent the past 15 years working in Indigenous communities all throughout BC, doing youth and child advocacy for families, and have specialized in trauma-informed practices and therapies. And I'm grateful to be here. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kelsie.
Ani Bojo Riley Yesno Indigenous Kaz Yamatong First Nation Nantonche Mi'kmaq Nandonjaba Niminweya. My name is Riley Yesno. I'm from Yamatong First Nation, a fly-in Anishinaabe community about 300-ish kilometers north of Thunder Bay, Treaty 9 territory, and I'm currently calling you from out east in Mi'kmaq. I'm a freelance writer and a researcher, and I'm beginning my PhD at the University of Toronto, looking specifically at Indigenous youth and politics. So I was really excited to have some space to be able to talk about, topics relevant to that work today. And I am also happy that I get to be here. Good.
Awesome. Thank you all. In anticipation of just how deadly this panel is, I put my Zoom video smooth out appearance little filter all the way up, so I'm looking quite young and dapper too. We have an incredible panel of I won't say new voices, because I imagine the three of you throughout your life have found a way to bring out that voice and to share your voice. You just happen to be doing it through media now. So to frame the conversation, I think I'd like to start with you, Brandi, in our first question. It says, we've seen the way that Canadian media through time, historically and obviously contemporarily, have really framed the conversation about Indian country in a way that automatically starts in deficit, right? The trauma headlines lead. There's always something wrong. The sky is always falling. But when you talk to youth, I don't necessarily know that they feel that way. In fact, I think most of them don't, especially now. I think we're in a new time. I think that Indigenous youth want to be free of the tropes, and they want to live full and complete lives. They want the barriers to that removed, and that's a whole other conversation for another day. But in what ways would you like to see Indigenous youth covered today in mainstream media?
Absolutely. So in regards to like trauma stories and adversity and such like that, this is something that's, going to be ongoing with considering everything, that we're dealing with. But it's also important to, make that shift to not just focusing on the, the trauma of the week, that makes, the headlines, but really going more in depth, behind those headlines, and, media making an effort to create meaningful relationships with these communities in order to really, tell the stories that need to be told, because there is such a broken relationship between media and our communities across the board. It's just as broken as the relationship between Canada. And so there's a lot of, there's reconciliation that needs to happen, and trust building. And, it's on the responsibility of the media to, make that happen and put in the resources and the time and the effort. It's not going to be able to be done, the traditional ways of legacy media where you're in and out, or you're parachuting in, or, getting your quote. This is something that's going to actually take effort. It's going to take investing into young reporters, whether you invest in Indigenous reporters or, other reporters to be able to do the work that needs to be done in order to bring, the stories out there. There are so many stories that are waiting to be told, so many untold stories in all of our rich, diverse nations.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so it just takes a shift, and hopefully that'll happen.
Yeah, Riley, you mentioned you're from Yabmatong First Nation, dare I say, a place where mainstream media doesn't go. And you're somebody that's found themselves in a lot of mainstream spaces as well. For example, the Prime Minister's Youth Council. And so you're one of these dynamic young people that we look to kind of go like, well, what's that story about? And as a question to you, as someone from Yabmatong who was grown up partly in the city, do you trust the mainstream media to get your story right? Like when you think about the way the mainstream media can talk about you, Riley Yesno, is there trust there for you? Do you think they can get it right?
I mean, can they? Yes. Do they? No. That is what I would say. I believe, like, obviously we have the capacity to do holistic storytelling full of care, but we just don't see it very often. And like, I think there's like, on the conversation we were just having about like, only trauma-based storytelling, like that the media is really notorious for. Like, of course, that doesn't encompass my story, my community story, anybody really, a young Indigenous person that I know. But the thing like beyond that, so like, yes, let's talk about things other than just like the grotesque traumas, is like, at least if you're going to report on them, do them right. Like the way the media reports on even like the bad stuff that they, should be experts at because they do it all the time, are not done with any sort of care, are not done accurately. And the way they talk about youth in these situations, I'm thinking about like youth suicides or murders, especially coming from Thunder Bay, that's a thing where the media was hugely focusing on. Like they talk about these young people as if they're criminals, as if they're adults, in all of these ways where, even our trauma isn't reported on properly. And so I think in order to get to a more appropriately, reported on place, there's, okay, first report the trauma better or report the hard things better and with accountability. And then, report on other things. Like Indigenous youth have to be, by the nature of our identities, experts in so many different ways on, history and law and justice, and yet we will never be looked at as like expert voices, people who can offer meaningful commentary, even if we're not like the subjects of a story, right? And so I think there's a lot to be gained in terms of what the media can do for us.
Yeah, well, and to your credit, Riley, you're popping up in those spaces and doing an excellent job in that way. And not just talking about like your earring collection or like native things. Like you can be a pundit on politics and everything else. So you're one of those people proof positive that is right in front of us. Kelsie, I want to go to you because you're doing something a little bit differently with Indigenous. And so I'd like to talk to you in this first question kind of about how you think Indigenous news and media is better positioned to get into the complexity and the nuance of our own stories, in particular to youth. So to you, in your work with Indigenous, from an Indigenous platform perspective, what are some unique sort of doorways you have as an Indigenous storyteller and journalist to get those stories right? How important is it for you to be with Indigenous as it relates to the question here today?
Yeah. So I've been having this discussion since Kamloops came out with their number. And way prior to that, that was actually the reason that I got into journalism, was because I seen the lack of representation of youth in media. And the reason I became so passionate about that was because I worked in communities where I seen high suicide rates as a result of people not, or children or youth not seeing themselves represented in any kind of good capacity or way. Their self-worth is dwindling because of media. And so it was so important to me that I claimed the space where it was, and just work to remind our youth how beautiful they are and powerful they are, and not necessarily that we're so resilient, right? Because we know that just promotes harm on our bodies, that word, but just who they are. And one of the first stories I put out about our youth was this beautiful profile on this young person. He was 12 years old, and he's an aspiring actor, and he's just such a beautiful young man. And when we posted that, we seen his family come and just share it and say, that's my nephew, that's my cousin, so they are finally like seeing who they are mirrored back to them, but with strength and beauty, and who we actually are. So for us, it was so important. And I have no qualms with telling mainstream media what they're doing to our people. And I don't care how hard I get taken down by anybody. It is what it is. Mainstream media created this image of us being people who are just traumatized all the time, when that's not the case. We have people out there working hard. Our young people are working hard to reclaim who they are. And that's something to be celebrated.
Brandi, you're someone that wields a pretty big bat in the space. I would say you're one of those like relentless voices that is sometimes, I think, swinging away in the dark, all alone in these big multinational companies, international companies. In our preamble, you were talking about this being the reason why you target international media, is because you want the world to know what this place is. So for you, as someone in the international space, and telling these stories around the globe, what is it, do you think, what is at stake in terms of Indigenous voices telling these stories to a global audience? And how important is it that it's Indigenous voices telling these stories on behalf of our communities, namely young people? Because people are paying attention now, and that's new, and we have to get it right. How important is this to you?
Oh, it's extremely important. I mean, what's at stake really is our future, our survival, our identity. There's so much that is wrapped up within media. Media is such a powerful influence in our world. And this is how people learn and understand about others, breaking stereotypes, creating pressure to oppressive governments, and a way for youth and Indigenous peoples to express themselves and share with the world what they want to share. It's giving voice in that way. And it's important that our people are the ones who are taking the reins in this, because we know what we're living, and we know how to best share that with the world, right, in the right way. And so there is so much on the line. Everything is connected. It's there was a quote, and I don't even know where this quote came from, but it describes media as being an extension of everyday life and a tool of cultural change. And when you recognize that and how powerful it is, and for us to be able to equip our own people, to tell our stories and bring those to the world, just imagine the revolutionary transformation that could happen, because our voices and our truths, right, have been stifled. And yeah, I just think that I don't know if it could ever be fully done correctly by people that aren't native.
Yeah, yeah. Riley, you're a part of a youth generation that I think is on the forefront of so much change, but namely, whatever we have deemed reconciliation to be today. I mean, it changes much to the dismay of Mr. Goodsocks himself, Justin Trudeau. Indigenous youth themselves have deemed reconciliation dead. And boy, it's like, I think a lot of people are kind of looking around going like, well, are you sure? Like, who killed it? I thought we were doing something good here, and it's young people themselves that are saying, no, we're not doing it this way. It's if this is what it is, we're not doing it. So I think what has happened here is we realize that we're not going to get a do-over. So if we do it wrong, we're not going to get Canadians back to the table in a meaningful and impactful way. So we have to do it right. So I'd like to ask you the same question, Riley. How important is it today in 2021 that Indigenous youth stories are led by Indigenous people, at our best Indigenous youth themselves, in order for us to get it right step by step, so we're not skipping any of the hard work and going straight to the easy stuff?
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so much there. One of the things I think about first is like, just like in the like another big buzzword along with reconciliation that we throw around a lot is decolonization, right? And it's a super colonial idea that like youth can't be the ones telling their own stories and that they aren't already existing in these spaces. Like in our communities, or at least any community that like I've known, young people hold extremely important like roles at the forefront of our nations. And so for them to not be taking up this space in this world is like a continuation of like a colonial imposition for sure. The other thing is that, there's like just generally the importance of media in that how can Canadians mobilize to fight injustices that they aren't informed of? How do we understand the scope of an issue that takes up virtually no space in the average newsfeed? How are Indigenous youth supposed to know that their successes and their struggles and their lives are at all taken seriously by anyone outside their own circles? Those are what the media is meant to do. And if we don't do it, how we can see the consequences come about. I think people really don't focus on enough, like as you were saying, Ryan, like just like how powerful Indigenous youth are as a generation, the fastest growing demographic in this country. They are the people that Canada is going to have to answer to from now into the future for the foreseeable future. And like I meant to talk to you about this a bit later on, like when we're talking about what stories need to be focused on, but like I don't think people paid half enough attention to the fact that Indigenous youth said reconciliation is dead. Like, do you know what a political stance that is? What repercussions that has on this country in a political sense? Like, reconciliation is a multi-million-dollar economy. It has millions of dollars poured into it through every federal budget. People's whole jobs are on reconciliation, and Indigenous youth are saying, we don't want it. So what happens there, right? That's something that I think people haven't really begun to delve into, and that we're going to need to see a lot more focus on. And I think we're going to, no matter, I say we need to, but Indigenous youth will make sure we will, no matter what. So.
Kelsie, you come from a territory in British Columbia that we widely know that when we talk about British Columbia, it's largely it's unceded territory, right? And so the sovereignty over in media voice and everything else. And by the way, this isn't a dig at BC, but it's a dig at everyone else that makes the distinction that BC is unceded. So is Treaty 3, where I come from. So is Treaty 9. Just because we signed treaties doesn't mean we're ceding anything. And that's not a beef between you and me, Kelsie. That's a beef between me and the world. But from a place that prides itself and carries itself as sovereign and as nations, how important is it that Indigenous people really control the editorial narrative that comes out of the media from your homelands, from your territory? And we can relate that back to youth if you wish, but even just generally.
Yeah, that's a great question. Because more and more that this has been going on, we've been talking about story sovereignty and sovereignty as storytellers. And this I absolutely love everything Riley says, and I see your fire, and I live for that. I live for that fire. And that same fire lives in my children too. And they are, they are the future. And all of this time that we talk about being, questioning about how we're going to be perceived all the time. It's incredible to think about the power that we hold. And so at Indigenous, we've dropped the gloves. Like we're done. We're done with mainstream media. We're done with upholding whatever standards that they want to talk about and hold up. We're done, and we're just creating our own, and we're literally building our own table to sit at because we're done. Like we can't be even CP standards, all of those things that are meant to disempower our people or to trigger our people and how we write. Like, no, we're sovereign people, and we get to have story sovereignty, and we get to talk about things the way that we want to, because media is in charge of the social order. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that we need to tell our stories from our own voices and accurately, because I was even questioned last week on the radio, how can you have story sovereignty and ensure that it's being told accurately? Well, that's not our choice to make. we have inner knowing. We're born with inherent birthrights. We know we know our truth. And so if that does not sit right with someone's own personal narrative, then they can find their news elsewhere. And that's kind of become our stance at Indigenous, is find your news elsewhere then, because if we're not serving your narrative, that's fine. We don't care to. So we're just, honestly, we've become completely radical storytellers and breaking away from everything else, because that's how we're going to save our own narrative at this point and uphold our stories and our laws and our lives.
Kelsie, thanks so much. You know what? Before we started, for folks that are watching online on various platforms, Riley lit some medicines for us. She lit a smudge for us and put that good medicine in the air. And now Kelsie's just dropping bombs. And I'd like to thank that medicine for clearing the air and bringing our good hearts and minds together this way. Because that's it, right? Is like we we can point to Hollywood, right? The origins of Hollywood. Literally, Hollywood was built on the stories of killing Indigenous people, right? But we're now in an era where John Wayne is dead. Like that doesn't work anymore. And so it is an interesting time we're in, and we've come a short way. We've come a long way in a short amount of time, and I think that piece is really not lost on young people. I'm an old, like I don't even know how I got here. I think someone canceled and I had to fill in. Like I don't belong here. So let me be grumpy uncle for 1 second, and I'll set up the next round of questions. But back in my day when I was 20 something, we weren't using this language. We weren't talking about decolonization, reconciliation. We weren't talking about nationhood. We were talking about pizza and youth groups and like, can we go play softball and shit like that? And now young people are so much smarter, so much more passionate and driven to reclaim what is theirs. And I often quote Drake as a chubby, out of touch old dad often will. But in a track, Big Rings, on his album he made with Future, on the song Big Rings, the lyric is "What a time to be alive." And I really think we're in a time that 30 or 40 years from now, they're going to write books about. Like, we're going to look back on this time and go, that's when it was all happening. And this panel, and so many others, are creating, you're creating that change, living that change every single day. It's just an incredible time. So Riley, I'm going to go back to you in response to Kelsie's comments, and then I'll go back to Brandi. Uh, Riley, for you, in terms of the sovereignty and media piece, let's talk about responsibility, because I think, again, young people are so motivated to tell their own stories, and really want to accelerate that learning. We can see it on native TikTok, we can see it on Snapchat, we see it on Instagram, we see it on the social media platforms, but we're also seeing it in other places, podcasting and other places. For you, as a young person, what are some learnings you've had in terms of the reciprocity and responsibility back to community, and how do you feel that pressure as a young Indigenous person, on these various platforms, trying to raise your voice and bring voice to issues?
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked, because it's something I sit with like all the time about like that accountability piece. Um, and something I had like the hardest time with and continue to in academia is the fact that like, what we do, and especially what I do as an Indigenous studies scholar, is like write about Indigenous communities and then like lock up all of that knowledge that we have in like ivory towers that you need to pay thousands of dollars to access, and like the people that I'm writing about and who want to be serving with that knowledge don't have access to it. And so that is so extractive and gross, and like something that I think is a huge barrier for a lot of Indigenous academics, and where I turned to writing in like the public world as to be to help mediate that sort of gap I felt. But you mentioned like TikTok and Instagram and all of these things. And I think like this is a perfect example of the ways Indigenous youth are really like pioneering community access and like diverse forms of knowledge production, ways that like, we just have never valued before. I think about even like memes, which is something that like at one time I'm like in my 20s, and so I shouldn't have, but I scoffed at. I was like, oh, memes. And like I had some really amazing teachers, other young people, tell me like, no, Riley, don't you see what they're doing is they're distilling these like incredibly complex political stances and world events into digestible images and language that can be shared amongst so many different people. And how incredible is that we've made that knowledge accessible to folks, even folks living up on the res that like, don't have mainstream media coming to them. And I was like, you're totally right. And I think that that's something Indigenous youth specifically have so much power in. They've recognized it without, even telling anybody. They're just doing it. And it's like really friggin' incredible, and something that I think like speaks to the way that they inherently understand that this is like a collective project, that media is supposed to be, and knowledge is supposed to be about liberation, and that we have to find ways to share that. Otherwise, what's it for? So.
Thank you, Riley. Brandi, I wanted to come to you to talk about that reciprocity piece, and for you as a freelancer who goes out there and takes big bites out of big stories. How do you find yourself grounded in the storytelling you do as it relates back to really representing the complexity and the nuance in the stories that you choose to tell? For example, you were most recently in Fairy Creek, covering that. How do you ground yourself as a journalist, with the high stakes and the pressure that you find yourself in inside of the stories you tell, as it relates back to the reciprocity and the accountability piece through the stories you tell?
Yeah, so that's a balance. That's a balance, especially when you're busy, you're freelancing and you have a heavy load, because what's really important when your storytelling is the relationship building. I'm sorry, but I think that 80% of what we do is relationship building and making those connections with people, and you know, breaking down a lot of those barriers. And when I'm at a story, I like to follow up and keep in contact, you know, to see, you know, how people are doing. And that's not always feasible, because you just become totally overwhelmed with, you know, all of your work. So you have to make a point of doing it to, you know, there's rules sometimes around allowing your subjects, the characters that you're featuring, to look over your work and stuff like that before you publish. There are some instances when I do allow that, but I make sure to be just extra diligent in what I'm doing, and get everything right that I need to get with them. Because like I said, every you know, culture and nation is so different, right? Even when it comes to the little things, such as how to properly spell, you know, their nation, or, you know, getting to know and you know, understand the differences between, you know, some of these cultural, you know, practices and traditions that you're talking about. So, you know, there is a huge responsibility for that, because if you screw up, I'm not saying that you know, you never screw up, that gets out there, and it can really harm all your hard work that you've been doing. Even though you're not doing it intentionally, it can happen. So you say, for instance, when I was at Fairy Creek, I did this feature, and there was a youth that I had interviewed and featured on there with a really just a powerful story. And she reached out to me after to let me know that she was uncomfortable with revealing where she had worked and something that had happened there. And she asked me to change it. And I like immediately go to my editor and I honor those requests, because that would bring harm to her, right? So it's just things like that, and just being diligent and accurate. And yeah, it's a lot of work. And yeah, that's about that. Did that answer it? Did I give was that what you were looking for?
Totally. Yeah. It really well, and your specific your specific challenges, right? As a journalist going into those big stories, there's not a way you can possibly know all of the cultural nuance and complexity each and every time you're out, and so you definitely answered it. You know, as it pertains to your last story. And I think that I think that the accountability piece is really important. And I say this again as a grumpy uncle, like we all want to rush into the work.
Yeah.
But sometimes when we're new to the work, we have to understand our blind spots. And the accountability piece is one of those slippery ones, right? That that through mentorships and different things that I've been a part of, sometimes this work is about protecting young people from themselves too, right? Where it's like, I want to burn down chief and council because, you know, this and that. And it's like, well, yes, but we have to take, you know, very intentional steps to get to where we have to go, to find out whether what you want to do is not good or not. But
And it's so important for editors and newsrooms to really support this work and their journalists on the ground who are working to do it right, whether it's they, you know, allow them more wiggle room with their deadlines, you know, pay for an extra night at a hotel or day to do the work that needs to be done. That is so important to have that support and understanding, you know, for what you're doing.
yeah, so we thank everyone for being here. We are in our last 15 minutes of our conversation. Time flies when you're having fun. I do see one question in the Q&A. I invite you to join the Q&A, have your voice heard. If you have a question, you can drop it in the Q&A. I'll get to those in just about 8 minutes or so, and we'll leave a few minutes at the end for those questions and discussions. We know that there are a lot of dynamic young people across the territory that are doing incredible things, and these stories often go unseen, unheard, unchecked. And today we want to kind of close on highlighting some stories that we think people would be excited to hear, and we want to talk about why these stories should be covered. So I'm going to go down to Kelsie. Kelsie, do you have a story of from a youth perspective that is exciting to you, and that should be covered, and if it should be covered, why so?
Yeah, I mean, there's countless, like you said, there's countless stories that need to be covered and should be covered. I've been focusing on doing a lot of youth profiles. I think that that's a really safe way to talk about, to just amplify our youth right now. Especially in these times, I feel like the most important stories that we can share are stories just of our youth celebrating their identity and what they're doing. Because we have youth who are, like my children, for instance, that are going and learning our language and reclaiming our language and learning our songs, and are completely instilled in our ceremony. All of this is an act of resistance. And so when you document our acts of resistance and the acts of resistance by our youth, you are granting them back their birthright, to claim their space and who they are and their identity. Over time, what we see and what I've seen in my work with communities, doing a lot of work around child development, and same as in my post-secondary, what we see is that that actually has the power to change our blood memory. It has the power of changing us when we see ourselves reflected in a good way. So to do the work, like Brandi said, it doesn't matter what it takes. And so for any newsroom across the country, it doesn't matter what it takes. If you're serious about reconciliation, then put your money where your mouth is and sit in these communities with these youth and listen to their stories and gain these relationships, because there is no reconciliation. Like, reconciliation is dead. It is dead. So kind of finding your place and your footing. Okay, so then how can we build something new? And that's giving your time.
Thanks, Kelsie. Every time Kelsie answers a question, you remember the commercial with the Kool-Aid man? The Kool-Aid man cooler? Like where he goes running through the wall. Every time she answers a question, I feel like the Kool-Aid man, and I want to run through this wall over here. Indigenous youth stories forever. You know?
That's right.
Yeah. Thanks, Kelsie. Riley, I know you have your thumb on the heartbeat of what is happening with the Indigenous youth population writ large in Canada. Do you have any examples of stories that you can think of, or that you might be able to cite, that excite you, that you think maybe people should and need to hear?
Absolutely. I also, if you hear my dog growl, I apologize. She is like, it's time for her kibbles and she is losing it. But I like, as I will also say that I'm a bit biased because like I follow politics like most closely. And so like, I'm going to talk about like politics in general, but I truly believe that like all of our political correspondence, all of our media is like hugely missing like the political power of this generation of Indigenous youth. I said already that they are the fastest growing population, but like, I don't think people understand just like how distinct and special it is in that, you know, we are the first generation to have never attended a residential school or a day school. We grew up in this era of reconciliation with the official apology, with the TRC, a very different political landscape than our parents, our grandparents did. And yet we still say reconciliation is dead. And so there's that political repercussion I already touched on. But like, if you're not paying attention, you're also going to miss where young people are leading us instead. And that's the thing, is that they're not just saying it's dead, everything's over, nihilism. Like they're like, no, like there's an actual place we want to take you instead. And for Indigenous youth, like that's land back, which is a incredibly nuanced policy position, actually, which is like, you know, material change, reparations, return of like so many different things that they call for actively and organize in so many ways. And so you're going to miss all of that. And like, until it hits you in the face, unless, you know, you're actively following them and treating them like the incredibly powerful political actors that they are. So I think Indigenous youth, politics, they go hand in hand. Everybody's missing out.
Thanks, Riley. Yeah, there was, I mean, it's not that I wasn't paying attention, it was that I wasn't paying attention in the right way. And so when Riley brings up land back, for those that don't know, I'm a stand-up comedian, and I tour the world doing comedy, and this job sometimes. And I wrote a joke. Basically, it said "land back," and then I said "then what?" And I was doing kind of as a chant. And then I said, "Oh God, I don't want to get in trouble with Riley or anyone else, but I'll put my ass on the line. I don't really care." I said "land back, then what?" And then the punchline of the joke was like, "I don't know what y'all are yelling about. Most of y'all don't even know how to go camping." And that's a funny joke. I don't care what anyone thinks. However, Indigenous youth meme culture had about 3 or 4 good days with my face all over it, where they're just like, "Hey, tell the chubby uncle to shut up. He's not a part of the conversation anymore." And that's when I knew it was over for me. Like, talk about irrelevant, fade off into the background and let everyone else do their work. It was like, it was really poignant because, and I say this because, like, I was paying attention, but not in the right ways. And so, to your point, Riley, yes, yeah, we're creating Indigenous pop culture. We're creating culture, we're creating history, and it's happening through media. And if you're not actually paying attention to the message, then it's going right over your head, as it was for me. And you're right, dynamic ideas and leadership, and pragmatic as well. Like, highly pragmatic. Like, look, this is what you could do. So really, really exciting time. Thanks for that, Riley, and thanks for dragging that story out of me to get myself in more trouble. Rest in peace, my mentions. Brandi, can you think of a story that you think might be undercovered or underserved as it relates to Indigenous youth today? Is there anything that rises to the top for you that you wanted to share today?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, especially I agree with both Kelsie and Riley, who are just like incredible women of fire. And I just want you guys to know that I'm so proud of you. And I'm just so excited that you're doing this. You're just blowing me away. Like, I'm really, really inspired. So yeah, I mean, there's so much that we could focus on. Like, there are youth that are rising up to, combat climate change in their nations, taking on, these incredible initiatives. There's cultural revitalization and the rising up of our land defenders across this country is so powerful. Like, I see it everywhere I go, and at Fairy Creek. And there's not just the Indigenous peoples that are that's their traditional territories, and they're coming from all around and getting involved in these powerful moments, and taking their place. And also just like profiling these youth that are coming into their own again, and learning who they are, and powerfully stepping into that and asserting their rights. And there are countless across the country. And I just there's this I just want to say really quickly, when I was in Fairy Creek, the Pachidat hereditary chief, he's 20 years old, and he's just coming into that. That is incredible. And he's leading like these droves of people that have been gathering there to save those territories there. Like, I think that's incredibly fascinating. Things like that. So nobody scooped me. I tried to find him for 3 days and I couldn't, because he's kind of like a wanderer and he's all over. So but I'm gonna go back and profile him and his incredible journey.
One of the things that I think is fundamentally in question here is, in the media, like, who gets to be an expert, right? Like, who gets to be a pundit? Who gets to have that airtime? And how did they get there? And why are they there? Why are those seats constantly kept warm for the same handful of people? Right. And unfortunately, as it pertains to our opportunity as Indigenous people to find a seat on these panels, on the Sunday morning talk shows that call into question politics and legislation and policy, or radio shows, regional or territorial, like, we've been hearing these names for a long, long time, and the question is like how and why are these people still just always seem to be around, and how do we as Indigenous people not just kick open the doors, but make sure those doors stay open for our people to have their voices heard? And so there's 15 more hours left in this conversation. We're in our last 5 minutes now, but those are some of the things that I think we still need to talk about, is like, how do we access mainstream media? How do we ensure that our voices are contextualized properly, and that we have a constant conversation with those that make decisions in newsrooms, editors, and people that are giving out assignments each and every day, people that need to better understand our stories so they can work with us inside of newsrooms. I think newsrooms are still predominantly very violent spaces for our people, and so finding a way for us to work into those spaces is still a big question that I'm left with today. In our last couple of minutes, I just want to turn the floor over to each and every one of you for any parting remarks, anything, any sort of thing that we didn't talk about today that you were hoping to touch on. I'll give each of you a minute to kind of express anything that you'd hoped we'd touch on today but haven't had a chance to. And I'll go in reverse order. We'll go Kelsie, Riley, Brandi, and then we'll bring this thing home. Kelsie, did we miss anything that you were hoping to touch on this afternoon?
Well, there's a lot to be said. Like you said, there's 15 hours more of conversation. But just to a lot of us don't want our trauma splayed across the screens of mainstream media right now. So if mainstream media is wanting to do anything, it is to uphold their own governments and their own systems right now to account, and allow us our space and our time to grieve. That's one message that I just really want to send out to any media, is give us the space and honor our dignity to grieve. And then also when it comes to Indigenous youth, to put in the time, just put in the time to be able to come into these spaces, because we have stories in our nation that are coyote stories that talk about visitors to our homes. And so the trauma-informed guide that I'm creating for media is based around that story, is based around the coyote story of going to homes and taking what's not yours. And so to be very careful on how you step foot into people's territories and do your work, and just basically, let's try to dismantle that privilege. I would love to just say dismantle media in general and let us rebuild something, but I know that that's not going to happen. So if you have the means to just build your own table and let it exist.
Awesome, Kelsie. Thanks so much. Where can people find you online, Kelsie? What are either your social media handles or a website that people can check out more of your work?
Yeah, so we are at www.indigenews.com, and then you can follow us on Twitter at Indigenous Media, and I am at Kelsie Marchand, but my name is Kelsie Kilawna on all other medias.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelsie. Thanks for being here today, bringing your good heart and good mind to this conversation. Riley, parting words. Anything we missed that you'd hope to touch on today?
Yeah, nothing huge. I mean, the only thing I would say to your last comment, Ryan, about what you're left with in this conversation is that we always should recognize that scarcity is a really enduring myth of colonialism that they've really sold us all. That, there are only a few seats for Indigenous people, that there are only a few places on the newsfeed for this story, and that we all need to be fighting for those seats at all times because those are the only seats that exist. And so, of course, that is colonial mythology, but it's something that the media has long upheld and supported with the way that they report and with the way that they do their business. And so I think that there's an active unlearning, decolonizing, if you will, to be done in terms of or undermining those colonial myths. So yeah, down with scarcity. That's it for me. Miigwech. I'm so happy to be here.
Thanks, Riley. And where can people read more of you, either through your social media, your website, or wherever you're publishing?
Yeah, so my website is RileyYesno.com. Most of anything I publish gets uploaded there. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Riley Yesno Maybe.
That's an incredible Twitter handle. Riley, yes, no, maybe. Very, very good. Thanks for being here, Riley. Always appreciate your strong voice. Brandi, final word to you. Anything we'd not touched on today that you'd like to share? Anything lingering in your heart, your mind?
I just want to say that this is really exciting times for us. We are a powerful generation. We are the 7th generation. We're meant to be here right now. And our stories are going to be brought to the world to, help in the era that we're in. And so it's a really exciting time to be able to be a storyteller during these times. So there are some crappy things, but there's a lot of amazing things to look forward to, and we have the opportunity to, write how all of this unfolds. So it's a privilege. It's absolutely a privilege to be able to do this work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brandi. And for people looking to read more of your work, where might they find you online, either where you publish or any of your socials?
Yeah, so I'm published at various media outlets. I'm on Twitter at Songstress28, and I'm on Instagram at bmorinstories.
Excellent. Thanks, Brandi. My Instagram handle is Big Bad Moose Hunter. You can find me. Just had to get one last cheap one in there, just cheap dad jokes all day. I'm at RM Comedy wherever you do your thing. And it was really, really nice to be here. We want to remind everybody of the helpline again for anyone looking to or needing to talk with folks. We ran that slide at the top of our live stream here. Maybe if we could have that slide put up just one last time as we exit, we'll draw attention to that helpline. We encourage anyone needing to talk right now to reach out to that helpline. There's a national helpline, and there are provincial helplines as well. We have the crisis line here. It's the national line, 1-866-925-4419, 1-866-925-4419. We thank you all, attendees on the various platforms through social media, for being here today. We thank you, Riley, Kelsie, Brandi, and of course, Journalists for Human Rights, for bringing us all together. We don't have a word for goodbye in our language, so we say Bama Pin and Dinaway Maganaduk, which means we'll talk to you all again. My relatives, take good care of each other and yourselves. Check on your elders and love each other. We'll talk to you all again very soon. Miigwech. Miigwech Bizin.